How do I find a new job? How can I make a career change? And the biggest question of all, can I really find a career that I love? Hey, my name is Jen Smith, and I believe career success doesn't have to be at the expense of living a radiantly happy and healthy lifestyle. As a former HR leader and recruiter turned career coach, I get what companies are looking for when hiring top talent. What that means for you is an unmatched combination of insider knowledge and the best kept secrets about making heart-based career changes and navigating the ups and downs of job searching in today's world of work. Whether you're a recent graduate navigating the job market for the first time or a seasoned professional ready for a career change, this show is for you. So grab your coffee or your kombucha, pull up a seat, and get ready to be challenged and inspired to move beyond your self-doubt and take the right next steps towards landing a career you love. Because you deserve a long, radiantly happy and healthy career. This is the Flourish Careers Podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Flourish Careers Podcast. I'm Jen Smith, your host, and today I'm thrilled to be here for another installment of Flourishing Together. These are special segments dedicated to curated conversations with industry insiders sharing wisdom and strategies for improving your work and well-being. Today, I am so delighted to introduce you to Jamie Jacobs. For years, Jamie was known as an award-winning HR executive, but really her secret sauce was something far more powerful. A transformational change agent using her leadership roles to challenge outdated systems and unlock the potential of people, teams, and organizations. Now, she's fully stepping into that role, shaping the future of work in bold new ways. As the founder and CEO of Gig Talent, Jamie is leading a movement that redefines how companies access top-tier leadership and people strategy expertise in the gig economy. She knows firsthand that organizations don't just need HR, they need visionaries who can drive agility, innovation, resiliency, and cultural transformation. Gig Talent is that bridge, connecting businesses with the right experts to scale, evolve, and thrive in an era of constant change. Jamie's passion for reinvention extends beyond the workplace. As a speaker, author, educator, and host of the Courageous Choice podcast, she champions bold leadership and decision-making. She believes the most impactful transformation begins with a single, brave choice, whether in business, leadership, or personal growth. Looking ahead, Jamie is focused on expanding Gig Talent's impact, setting a new standard of excellence in the gig economy, and empowering organizations to think differently about leadership and talent while making it easy to leverage the right talent at the right time in the right way to bring business strategies to life. She's no longer just shaping companies, she's shaping the future of work itself. And today, she's here to share her story and invite all of us to think more creatively about what a fulfilling, impactful career can truly look like, especially in the new world of work. Jamie, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
So excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Jen.
Yes, and I have to share with listeners, fun fact, Jamie and I have been connected for over 15 years. I did the math this morning, which is just wild to think about. So we worked together early in our careers and then stayed in touch through LinkedIn mostly, and then reconnected a few years ago. And now I'm so proud to be part of her agency as an HR consultant. And it's been a really meaningful part of my career path. And so I also think about relationships too, right? Relationships evolve, and as the gig economy opens up and it gives us the space to blend impact and expertise and flexibility in ways that align with our values, which is what I talk about all the time. And so being able to collaborate with leaders like you, Jamie, is just one of the many reasons I love this work. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it truly is an honor. I think that your experiences, you meet people, you build those relationships. And that's part of doing good work with good people is really what it's all about for me. And so the fact that we got to reconnect in this kind of new phase of our lives is pretty awesome.
So tell us about the inspiration behind starting Gig Talent.
Yeah, I can tune right back into 2018 when I made the leap out of corporate. I loved corporate. I am so grateful for all the amazing companies and people I worked with. And it was just time. And so I made that leap. And as I was making that leap, I had a lot of friends who happened to be CHROs and heads of HR or other C-level executives. And they all were like, I want to do what you're doing, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of sales and business development.
Oh, yes.
And I go, I don't think everybody should be a consultant or a coach. But I definitely don't think anybody should stay where you hate your job, right? Or where you aren't feeling fulfilled. So that kind of would happen. And then I just started thinking about that role that fear can play in our lives, right? And then at the same time in California, AB5 was happening and the way that companies can engage with consultants was changing and making it more difficult. And I was like, we can solve the complexity and compliance for companies who want to engage great talent. And all these people who are really talented that want to work differently, we can help them. And so creating gig talent was really about a solution for all stakeholders. And as I was on my own at first, before we had launched Gig, it was, we were happy to get work from anywhere. And some of it felt really good and some of it didn't feel so good, right? And so it was thinking about, okay, what model is going to feel good, is going to be an attractive model to what I consider top talent, right? Some people, there's lots of consulting out there and people go on their own, people work through firms, and many people do multiple things. But I just generally, we wanted to create gig talent for those really, really talented people, top of their game, best in class at whatever they love to do, and have a model that was attractive to them. And we've done that. And so we launched at the end of 2019. End of 2019, right before COVID, which, people go, oh my gosh, that must have been crazy. And I think for us, it was, we were early movers in something that probably got expedited through COVID and companies thinking differently about how we work, whether it's remote or hybrid, leaning into HR, the role that HR kind of plays in their organizations and thinking about talent and leadership and all those things. And so it's just been really fun. We continue to evolve and I get to learn every day, which is, really rewarding for me.
I am so glad that you set this agency up. And I'll tell you too, one of the fears that I had doing this work was, the business development side of things and how does that work? And I think, you're so good at relationships and having those conversations with folks and being really well connected, that's such a strength of yours that you bring to this space that we all, can appreciate and helps build your business. So yeah, I think that's fabulous.
It comes down to relationships. People do want to do business with people that they trust and they feel bring, a standard of excellence to the work. And I'm really proud of, thank you for saying that. It's a little embarrassing, but it's also really great because I think that's now a lot of people call themselves a coach or a consultant or whatever. And how do you know who's good and what they're really good at? And that's what gig talent does for clients, right? One, we attract a really high caliber, best of the best of what they do. We inventory, we know what they're really good at. And so then we're able to do this match and save a ton of time for consultants. And so it's just, which to me, like you said, I'm relationship first. So I don't want to sell something that I don't believe in or that isn't going to be what the client needs. I'll tell them before we would do that. And I think that's been part of, what's helped us be successful.
Definitely. And you mentioned when you were talking about the inspiration behind gig talent is this idea around thinking differently about talent, and the pandemic definitely helped some folks do that. But I've noticed that there still is a little bit of a stigma around coaching or consulting. And you just said it, everyone can be a coach or a consultant, right? So how do you respond to that narrative? And what do you think people are missing?
It's so interesting. Yeah. I still feel it. I guess I'm a consultant sometimes and, I wear that hat occasionally and it's not my favorite thing to be called either. I don't know. It's a funny thing, right? So I get the stigma. I think what's changing is when you look at the data, so over 50% of the workforce is going to be involved in the gig economy by 2030. 50%. Now that could mean a side gig. That could mean, driving for Uber or whatever. But it also, the shift is that really talented, expert level talent across all different kinds of disciplines are choosing to work differently. What companies are realizing is that they can get the best of the best experience and leadership and whatever they need, but at a level that's appropriate for the stage of their company. So instead of having to invest in a full-time C-suite executive and give up more equity and have the fully burdened costs with benefits and everything else, they can get somebody who's choosing to work that way in their sweet spot. Maybe it's 10 hours a week, maybe it's 15 hours a week, maybe it's 20 hours a week. They can scale with the business as it grows, and then they can help them hire the right full-time person when the business justifies that. But in the meantime, they're not compromising.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true across disciplines and across levels. But it's a big shift, right, for organizations to think outside the box of like a job description or an FTE and recognize that consultant isn't a 4-letter word, and it doesn't mean somebody who couldn't get a job, and it doesn't mean somebody who's using a 20-year-old playbook. It means somebody who's at the top of their game, who has enough confidence to have gone on their own and decide what their niche is, what they're really, really good at. We call it the custom tailored suit, and then go deliver that value to organizations that can use it. And that's a different thing, right? But once people kind of get the value proposition and they have that experience with one of the gig talent qualified, certified consultants or someone else, and they really can live it, they recognize like, oh, this is really an extension of team just in a different way. But it allows us to access a caliber of talent that either was reserved for large enterprise organizations because of the investment that was required, and they just went without, is really a lot of times what would happen. I would talk to CEOs all the time where they're like, yeah, I have my office manager doing HR, and then they'd go, but they're not like adding strategic value. And I'm like, well, they're your office manager. That's not what they're experienced in, right? And so they'd have this gap, and now they don't have to go without. So I think it's helping think differently and thinking about, what does consultant mean? Like, because I think there's all those stigmas we just mentioned, or they would think like temp, right? Like a kind of a lower skilled, different place within the workforce. And it's just really eye-opening, I think, for many people to understand that really talented people are choosing to work that way. And it's not, I think the other stigma is that they're doing it because they don't want to work very hard. And actually, that's not the case. A lot of really driven, ambitious people are just choosing to work this way. They're working as much or more, but maybe having impact across multiple organizations, and they find that rewarding.
Yeah. And that's where my perspective comes from, because I do hear this, I hear some of the stigmas around people that are craving flexibility in their career. And, you talk about a consulting or contract type of work, and there's like this moment of pause, like, isn't that for people that like can't get a real job or whatever? And it's like, well, no, it's really about knowing your strengths and designing your own path and intentionally choosing things that align with your values and energy, and going in and doing that work and making the impact, like you said, of one team, multiple teams. So we've got to change this narrative, Jamie.
It is. It's the narrative, and like thinking about. So a lot of people, I feel like, who have made this really are like builders. So they, and they come in and they help, whether it's at an individual or functional level, or even at an organizational level. They help with transition, transformation, change management, building, growth, right? All of those things. And then they're there for a few years and would get bored. And so often those people have changed companies in their career. And then now they're learning like, oh, I can just do that thing I love to do. Okay. So they're doing that. And then for companies to recognize like, when you're in that mode, that's the kind of person you want. And that's probably different than what you might hire to sustain something. Yeah. So depending on, it's really like a different mindset, thinking about what's going to help us right now and what makes the most business sense. And then for people, like you say this all the time, but it's, that energy to really live in alignment with your passion and what gets you excited about doing good work with good people. Like we just deliver better impact, right? And we have more fun, and it's fulfilling in so many different ways. And yes, you have an impact to your clients, and then it's mutual. So it's great for everybody.
It really is. And I just want to touch on one more, kind of stigma around this, like coming from I guess like a job seeker's perspective, or like from my perspective. And some people, and we talked about this earlier, around like the stability with traditional roles. And so one of the things I'd like to talk to people about, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is just the fact that I believe that having diversification in your income streams, like multiple income streams, actually is a stable way to work in today's world of work. So I was mentioning, multiple streams of income coming in, and not just relying on one traditional, kind of stable path, like it might not be that way anymore, and so maybe like thinking about having multiple streams of income and that diversification is a stability strategy. I don't know if you have thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I think, a lot of people think about that, right? Even criticism about like to companies for using consultants instead of hiring investing in a full-time person. I think that's a big stigma that we need to kind of bust because people, I'm sure there's companies that do it to get around things, but this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about them making an appropriate level investment in the skills that they need with somebody who is choosing to work that way. And it just makes good business sense, right? And so from a stability perspective, like there's this, creating your own stability. And it really is thinking differently. For some people, the check, paycheck hitting your bank account every other week and maybe an annual bonus that comes in and like flushes you for a little bit, like is really great. Like I lived that and it was wonderful, right? And so that's one structure, financial structure that can work. What's interesting, and it's some people will never move from that. It's just that's their comfort zone, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But I love what you're saying about like we can create a new reality for ourselves. And that structure can have multiple streams. It can be diversified, not only in the work, like maybe you're a photographer and a coach and I don't know, you're a green belt and you want to go help companies do Six Sigma. There's lots of things that you can do.
Definitely.
But it is about that activation, that impact that you're going to have. It's not just about what comes to you, but when you're doing things you're really good at and you're adding value, the financial part comes. And when you think about consulting, that it can be on your own. It can be through a firm. Many people have multiple things where it's some things through a firm, some things like with partners. What we do at Gig Talent is we represent people they all have their own businesses. We do a background checks and reference checks and a bunch of things in our certification process to validate so that when we match, we know we're setting them up for that sweet spot. But that's just one channel, right? Like people, they're doing direct, they're using their own networks. They're often working through, maybe it's BetterUp or the Muse or other different firms. And so you kind of get that. I think you use the word umbrella career and that creates flexibility, diversification, and a stability that you feel actually you have a little bit more control over. And in today's world with so many companies, going through restructures and potentially layoffs, I think, people are often thinking now, like what they thought was really secure and stable, you suddenly feel really not in control. And that is not a great feeling, right? So although it is scary and you don't get the guaranteed paycheck every other week, it's kind of how do you set play a little bit of a game with yourself so that you can get comfortable in this new thing that actually might be more stable and you have more control, but it doesn't always feel like that.
Yes, I totally agree. And I appreciate you explaining it both ways, from the business side and then, like the consultant side, because I think it's really interesting to hear both of those. From a business leader, these are the things to consider. From a consultant side, these are the things to consider. And so when you put that together in your mind, listeners, if you're thinking of like, hey, what could this look like for me? I think Jamie's perspective on both of those sides is really valuable. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Now, I love being part of a team. Sorry, I just want to say for those, I don't know what perceptions people have, but for me, when people say like, what do you want to do? The answer was always, I want to do good work with good people. That's what I want to do. And so, just to support what you're saying, like for those listeners who may be considering, it doesn't always matter the package it comes in.
Yeah.
But, deciding what's important to you is kind of will lead you on the right path.
Yes. And I want to add to that too, around like this whole idea of like misconceptions and stuff while we're talking about it, because I had a conversation recently with somebody and they were talking about, like the next level in terms of, like director to senior director or whatever it is, like the next level and how prestigious that felt for them. And we were talking about the fact that they value flexibility and they weren't getting the flexibility, but they were still thinking about how do I get to this next level? And so I was trying to explain about the idea of like, hey, what's more valuable to you, like the prestige of this title, which by the way, there's 12,000 titles, across the United States, the prestige of this title, or working in a way that's true to you and your values. And so I think there's, we're in this change right now where the world of work is literally being turned upside down, and we have to find new language to define these things for us. So maybe prestige is less than, not so much in a title, but it's in the impact that you're making versus like the org chart, And so I think like there's so much old language that we just have to like let go, and like the ladder, the titles, like it's experiences and, all of these things to make an impact versus that old school stuff.
I think it's super interesting. I think about it a ton. I can actually remember sitting in my big corner office of a Fortune 50 company. I was in my late 20s, and I was like, I love my job. I love my friends. I have a great life. And I just didn't feel connected to it.
Yeah.
And for a couple more years, I continued, eventually was at the C-suite, and then was like, okay, so that idea of like climbing the ladder, and then you get to the top and you're like, okay, I don't know if this was the right ladder, or like what now, right?
Yes.
Those kind of artificial constructs of title or level, and, often the comp and benefits and total rewards that come with those, hitting those achievements. Like I get it. And as someone who like was ambitious, okay, I did that. And then I was like, I'm still not feeling super fulfilled, right? And so today, what's fascinating is like, I think we're going to have a really ongoing conversation in this transition around, like, I'm growing probably more than I ever did.
Same.
I'm learning new things, right?
Yes.
Like, it doesn't stop. I don't necessarily have some external validation or even way to articulate it other than just by delivering better impact and value. But and I think that that's really true. So when I think about like it's internal, both in our identity, how we relate to others, how we feel or define achievement, I guess. And then it's also like externally around bringing organization in this gig economy, because I'm sure there are some people who are like, I'm just going to do what I've always done and I just want to do that thing. And there's a place for that. It's just different than what we do necessarily. And so, but how do you know that, right? If everybody wears the same consultant hat, and it's not like you're like, here's a list of, you're not going to detail every engagement you've ever had or that. So I think that, that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, is this kind of organization of the gig economy, or the validation of skills, and how do we continue to learn and grow so that we can really add that value when we're working in a company. If we are using a 20-year-old playbook like today, it's like irrelevant, right? So we need to be thinking about, how do we stay sharp? How do we really know what's going on? How do we understand best practices and co-create and trial and error and all of those things, so that, because there isn't, the truth is there is no playbook today.
No.
So we have to have that attitude of, being agile and learning and collaborating. And that's true whether you're an employee, like regardless, employee, contractor. I think those skills are critical on both sides. And what makes somebody successful really in either construct is going to be very similar. So I think that's important for people to know, right? It's not rest on your laurels on either side, right?
No,
employees that are going to be successful aren't those people either.
Yeah, it's this world of change that we're in. We just have to get better at it. And I think like the folks that are in your agency understand that and can draw on years of experience with top, Fortune 100 companies to then use that to see the future and the vision for the organizations that they partner with. And most organizations that are Fortune, 100, Fortune 50 companies are really good at change and being agile. And that's how they become so successful. So taking leaders that have been there in those spaces and then bringing them, to these organizations, and they can make that impact in a different way or a bigger way or however they want to make that impact, quite frankly. So yeah, it's a very interesting world that we're in right now. And so it really is. And now I want to take that idea, that question a step further and talk about like the successful quote unquote HR career, because this has evolved so much. And, it's so funny, like when we were talking about stigma, and as I was preparing for our conversation, I'm like, oh my gosh, like the stigma of HR has always loomed over me too. And it's just oh, HR's payroll, it's admin, it's the principal's office, like these old, old schools. And it's so much more than that, right? And so I don't know.
Jen, I like to be the police. I mean, police is really fun. That's what I want to do.
It's awful. No. So like, I feel like the world of HR has been evolving so much, right?
Oh my goodness. I step into this literally every day.
I know.
Because when I say HR, what I'm thinking is often very different than what somebody else, right?
Agree.
I'm not thinking about payroll and hiring and firing and compliance or whatever. All those are components of HR. Yeah. Here's an example and a story that I tell. So if you're talking about finance and you said, I promoted my controller to CFO and they're just not very strategic. And I'm like, yeah, well, they don't have capital markets experience. They don't have FP&A. So they're really good at whatever they were doing. And maybe they're a great leader, but they just haven't had experience in these more strategic components of finance that, if that's important to your business, are pretty critical for a CFO role, right? And it's the same in HR. It's not to devalue any of the functions of HR, but if we have a total rewards or an HR operations person or your talent acquisition and the recruiting and employee relations and all those things, those are important and they have to happen. But what I'm talking about is bringing that organizational leadership and talent lens to your business strategy in your C-suite, making sure that your organization is positioned to execute on that business strategy, and looking ahead to make sure that you're developing talent, retaining talent, and motivating talent to deliver, right? So productivity and engagement and how, your customer experience, all the things, right? And so what's funny in the language is that I don't actually know what to say. I'm not trying to use a bunch of jargon, but for some people, they think of it as like management consulting.
Yeah, right.
Not even, they literally call it different things.
Yeah.
So is it OD, organizational development, org effectiveness? Is it a business advisor? Is it and so there's all these kind of words. But I think that, what is really cool about this time that we're in right now is that small and mid-sized companies are starting to recognize that they don't need to have that gap in their strategic meetings. They can have a representative at the right level, but not, that you don't need to step in certain potholes. You can build things smarter, more cost effective. And to your point, really leverage the experience of someone who's done it in organizations potentially like you might want to build towards. They know what good looks like, but they can scale it at a level that's appropriate for your business and your business priorities. It's not a one size fits all. I always, I teach at USC, and one of the things I tell our students is you're going to learn, I'm going to build a huge toolbox. You're going to go through this tier program and you're going to have a huge toolbox. That doesn't mean you use every tool every time, right? It depends on what the business is trying to achieve, what those priorities are. And but the nuance is having enough experience to know what tool to use and when, and be able to enroll people to use it properly.
Yes, all of that. Yes to all of that. And, to changing the future, changing the world of work, it takes time. And I think these are the conversations that need to come up to start people thinking differently and using different language around all of this. So spot on. Jamie, from your lens, what types of organizations are embracing this fractional model or consulting for HR talent? Is there a specific industry type of organization? What are some of those trends that you see?
Well, I think what we're seeing is smaller and mid-sized companies, but that are growing or have growth goals, are starting to understand, again, that they don't need to make that compromise, but they also don't need to prematurely invest, $400,000 in an executive that they don't need full time yet, right? And so they can get that person or someone of that caliber at a fractional level, could be 10 hours a week. They attend your executive staff meeting. They coach whoever is internally handling HR. They are a point of escalation for anything that comes up. They build the strategy and the roadmap, and they, have deliverables like any other person on your team, but just within the however many hours a month or week that you commit to. And then as those organizations grow, they can hire the right people, supplement, and also be developing those skills with the internal team. So there's a ton of value. So I think it's more stage of company. We see so then you think about, okay, who's maybe an earlier adopter to change the way they think about talent. We see it in tech, biotech, even in nonprofit, interestingly. We have a lot of nonprofit clients, healthcare, med device, really but it's pretty industry agnostic. Manufacturing, it just depends. But what's great is that they are recognizing they can leverage talent differently. They can help as it grows. And when they get a big investment, maybe it's a Series A, Series B, Series C, and they're in that, they're like, okay, now we need to grow. We always want to have that conversation because, like, let's be really smart, right? Like, I'm sure you have an amazing culture. That's what's led to your success. And I can guarantee you it's going to change and evolve because you're going to add a bunch of people, right? So if you're intentional about that, you can be thoughtful so that it evolves in the way that you want it to, so that it really supports where you're trying to go and your business goals. And so having that strategic thought member on your team so that you avoid unnecessary potholes and talent loss and cost. I mean, an example was I had come into it was a company it was a fast growing startup with about 150 employees, and we grew it to 675 in 12 to 16 months. And they were using a recruiter and paying a really large fee for all their hiring. And we saved over $5 million by leveraging a partner in that and standing up our internal function, but with that partner. And so but you need somebody who knows that. Like, you don't know what the options are because you're not a functional expert, and you don't need to be a functional expert. You just need the right amount of someone who can help you make those good decisions.
And that's, in my experience too, working with gig talent, I spend 10 hours a week working with 2 different teams under one company, and it's fabulous. And that's exactly what you do. You help with the strategy, you kind of bounce ideas off each other, brainstorm, and, it's a great way to work and it's a great way to operate for teams. It's making me think of, I don't know if you've ever heard Reid Hoffman. He was the founder of LinkedIn, or one of the original. He talks about flash teams. Have you ever heard of this concept?
No, interesting.
Oh my gosh, it's so interesting. So, and it might be like outdated at this point, but it was when I was exploring like different ways of working, and he called it a flash team, meaning, like, I think of one of these small to mid-sized companies that you're talking about that's growing. And the idea of a flash team is you bring all the functional experts in. So it's like you bring the HR person, you bring the finance person, you bring the ops person, you bring all the people together as consultants. And the idea is that they're all in their zone of genius. They all know exactly what they're doing. You bring them together with the mission of whatever the mission is. And then they all go and do their pieces. And then it like builds something. So it's kind of just what you were talking about. But the idea of a flash team always stuck with me because I thought that was pretty neat.
I love that. And I think, as organizations evolve, one of the things that becomes really important is how do you keep that glue? So, you have your functional leadership hat, whatever your function is.
Yeah.
But you also have to have, when you're in this, at the top, you have to have the enterprise leadership hat too. And we don't always do a good job of helping leaders navigate when to go, what percentage of my time should be thinking about overall so that we're not overly siloed and that we're in alignment, keeping the most important things the most important things. Yeah. So I like that idea of something like a flash team where it's almost intentional about, I get that you're, the CFO or the CHRO or the ops person, but let's bring that lens and then look at it together to make sure that we're staying in alignment. Because that's where it's exponential impact if we're all swimming in the same direction.
Yeah, I think it's it's a really awesome concept. And it just speaks to this work. And especially if 50% of the workforce is going gig, we got to get on board with some of these ideas. And so I can just kind of envision it happening and working. And then I think from my side of things, when everyone's working in their lane and in their, where their energy is driven and they're all, towards something is feeling impactful for them. Just imagine that, you know what I mean? It's so powerful just to imagine a world where everyone's working in a way and on projects and leveraging their strengths. That's super powerful.
It is super powerful. It is. And it's, so the first step is that self-work around what brings me energy, what am I good at, and getting enough experience, of things you love and things you don't to figure it out, right? And then also to have enough experience to be able to add that value. Yeah. I think I have some really interesting conversations, and one recently was with a dean of a business school, and he was thinking about if success now is, if people want to work in the gig economy, so success is not necessarily the big job with the big company. How do we prepare them for that, right?
Yeah.
And what skills do they need to be successful? And I don't know that I have a really great answer, because I know, for you and I, the value we bring is because of the great experience we had in great organizations, right? So I always tell people though, like, notice those things. Notice what brings you energy.
Yes.
I often call it like breadcrumbs, and they just, they lead you to the next thing. And so I don't know. It's funny. I actually didn't know that I wanted to always do my own thing. My business school friends say I talked about it for 10 years. So I must have known at some level, but I wasn't aware of it. And, and everyone was like, how will you know when it's the right time? Like, that's a conversation we have a lot. And I think, often you might know it's not right. And then when it is right, you just kind of know. Right.
Yeah,
but it still feels like you're taking a leap. It's a really interesting thing. But I love this time that we're in.
Yeah.
It couldn't be any more exciting for someone like me who wants to build and learn and figure things out. And because that's what we're all doing, whatever, structure of employment and doing good work with other people.
Yeah.
You're a part of.
Yeah, it's so good. And I guess like one thing that came to my mind as you were saying that, kind of like what you were, looking back and your friends could see it the whole time. It's like hindsight is always 2020. So you're right, like following those breadcrumbs and like seeing what the connecting the dots are is really valuable when you're kind of thinking about what's next. And I had this feeling, when I was thinking of this was like, I kind of just felt like my time in corporate was complete. It was like, it wasn't like, I don't know, it just felt like, okay, I've done some pretty cool things and I've worked with amazing people. I just like had this feeling of completion. And that's really, I can't explain it any other way. So I don't know if that resonates.
Great. Yeah. It totally resonates. That's such a great word. I felt something very similar. I had this thing where I wanted it to be intentional. I didn't want it to be a default. This was more of my own internal stuff.
That's okay. Yeah.
But I was like, I'm choosing this. This isn't because I don't have other choices. I wanted to go out on a high. And so, and there is something you just kind of know. And I had this, to me, it was not really about being on my own. It was about building something bigger than myself.
Ooh.
So it's interesting that it is hindsight. And it's also like asking people that you trust around you, because they might reflect something back to you that you know at a deeper level, but you haven't fully accepted for yourself.
Yes, this is so true. And just having those folks to be honest with you and kind of put that mirror up can be so impactful.
100%.
For those that are listening, so say we've got some HR professionals out there that are listening and they're curious about this consulting gig as a next step, but they're afraid or, worried about these stigmas or whatever. What guidance would you share?
So I think that it is about, again, looking at how you can contribute. So I always say, say yes. Say yes to the cross-functional opportunity. Say yes to the project that somebody needs somebody to, and you just start getting these really valuable experiences. And I think that that's, whether you stay in corporate or you go out on your own or whatever, having that just variance in your expertise is really important. And I mean, even Jen, you started in operations, right? And you were kind of laughing at the HR stigma, and you started in ops, you should own that, right? I mean, it's so funny. But my advice is really just build some solid skills. And it's as much about the skills as it is with the confidence that comes from those experiences. Because the truth is, especially in HR and dealing with people, even if you've done it for 20 years, it's going to be new. There's going to be a new, we just talked about the times of change that we're in. And so it's not that you need to know everything. It's that you need to have enough confidence in yourself to know what you don't know, to know where to find resources and answers, and, to figure things out. And so I think that's the advice is kind of the same. And then when if you have that instinct where you feel like you are meant to do something different or make a shift in your lifestyle or whatever, people do it for all different kinds of reasons. Listen to it. And if you get that sense that Jen talked about and that I felt where this part is complete, even if you don't know what's next, because it's really scary, right? I'm totally good with change, but if I don't know where I'm going, that's really uncomfortable. But when you get there, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And now there's lots of ways to not feel, I always say consulting doesn't have to be a lonely gig, right? There are ways to have a network and to obviously continue to do great work with great people.
Yes. I would even argue you expand your network when you work in this capacity, because you're not just with you're one team that you're working with. You're with multiple teams and multiple different organizations. And I can't even tell you how much my network has grown since I've been doing this work. exponentially. It's wild. So yeah,
and
I
actually
love that.
that's really good advice too. If you're in-house, before you ever think about going out on your own, get involved in networking, build a solid network, both of people you've worked with and otherwise, because that's the first place you're going to go if you do go on your own and are trying to kind of market yourself or let people know that you're changing how you work.
Yeah, 100%. Now, as we wrap up, my favorite question that I ask everybody for a flourishing favorite. So a book or a podcast or a resource that has a significant impact on your career.
It's so funny. You told me you were going to ask this question, so I thought about it. And the book that came up for me, totally random, like not related to my career really, it's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, yes.
And Vander Kolk is the last name of the doctor who wrote it. It just goes to something you and I talk a lot about. And it's really about kind of how we manage our energy and what's happening in our body. And for me, whether it's stifling that creativity and that building, recognizing that like, okay, that's what I'm good at. So and then you recognize like, oh, that other people really value that, or that can be very valuable to organizations and help them achieve their goals. Like that's something that evolves over time in that understanding. But what I learned, and this book helped me, is that, when you're not in that alignment and your energy isn't flowing the way that it needs to, it can have physical impacts on our body. And today, whether it's mental health, physical health, the fact that I could sit in this chair all day and felt like I run a marathon because I'm so busy, but like literally didn't move my body, that those things are pretty life-changing for me. And it's something that I think is important for everyone to know. And that's why whatever the answer is for you, where your energy is going to flow, you're going to contribute your best, you're going to be learning and growing. That is what life is, in my opinion. And work is just a component and a vehicle for that. And it can take lots of shapes. And you just have to figure out what's right for you.
So good. I thank you so much for sharing. That is a fantastic book. I'm surprised it has not been recommended here before. So good one. I will put the link in the show notes for everybody to take a peek at that one. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Jen. It's so great to see you.
Yes. Your wisdom, I'm just going to say here, your wisdom is going to be so exceptionally helpful for folks as we continue navigating this crazy evolving world of work. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with folks. Just real quick, tell us your website so people can find you online.
gigtalentagency.com. And I'm happy, any HR professionals or otherwise who want to have conversations, I'm happy to have those conversations, and companies that are navigating growth and want to think about talent differently, like just reach out. Happy to be a resource, and we'll figure it out together.
Excellent. Thank you again, Jamie.
Thanks, Jen. Take care.